Hello everyone and welcome. Today we bring you an epic science fiction story from the HFY universe. The wind on Viridia never slept. It was the planet's one constant, a dry, restless breath that whispered through the Shard Desert, playing the millions of crystalline fragments like a world-sized wind chime. The sound was a kind of currency. It told you that you were alive, and it told you that you were alone. For Kael, it was the sound of business. He moved with a scavenger's economy, his worn mag boots finding purchase on the glassy terrain. His gaze swept the landscape, not for threats, but for opportunity. The glint of a polished alloy, the unmistakable silhouette of a corporate drone's chassis, the scorched earth from a recent orbital drop, these were the signs that led to a payday. A payday meant water, power cells, and another week of not having to eat the nutrient paste that tasted like boiled cardboard. That's why the silence was so jarring. It wasn't a fade, it was a switch being flipped. The wind died. The endless chiming stopped. The resulting quiet was a physical pressure, a void that demanded to be filled. Kyle froze instantly, his hand dropping to the worn grip of his holstered pistol. His eyes scanned the terrain, a ridge of rust-colored rock, a forest of impossibly tall crystal shards, and directly ahead, a massive, half-buried slab of granite. A figure stepped out from behind the slab. A girl, wiry and wrapped in tattered cloth, her face a mask of grime and desperation. In her hands, she clutched a jury-rigged weapon, a power harvester's grip fused to a plasma injector, a faint, unstable blue light flickering at its tip. She pointed it at him, her knuckles bone white. "The pack," she said, her voice a strained whisper, trying to sound like a threat. "Your toolkit and the power cell on your belt. Drop them and walk away." Kiel didn't flinch. He let his gaze drift from her wide, amber eyes down to the trembling weapon in her hands. He saw the flicker of the containment field, smelled the faint scent of ozone leaking into the air. He saw a poorly shielded capacitor already starting to overload. He let a beat of silence pass, a silence she rushed to fill. "Did you hear me?" she snapped, taking a shaky step forward. A humorless smirk touched Kyle's lips. "I hear you," he said, his voice a low rumble. He nodded at the device. "I also hear that capacitor whining. The injector coil isn't shielded. You're bleeding energy." He kept his tone conversational, as if explaining a simple mechanical failure. "My guess is you have about 10 seconds before the feedback loop blows your hand clean off." Doubt. It was a poison, and it worked instantly. Her eyes darted down to her own weapon for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening he needed. His movement was a single, fluid act of brutal efficiency. He closed the distance in 2 long strides, his hand shooting out not for the weapon, but for her wrist. His fingers clamped down, and with a practiced twist, he broke her grip and relieved her of the device. In the same motion, he thumbed the emergency release, and the dangerous blue glow died. The entire exchange took less than 2 seconds. He tossed the inert junk onto the sand. "If you're going to threaten someone," he said, his voice cold, "know your weapon better than they do." He turned his back on her, a dismissal more insulting than any blow. His prize, whatever tech he'd been tracking, was nearby. He had no more time for amateurs. "Wait!" she cried out behind him. A sob of pure, undiluted frustration tore from her throat, and with it came a soundless boom. Kale felt it not as sound, but as a physical impact, a wall of invisible force that slammed into his back, shoving him forward a full step. The air cracked with pressure. He spun around, pistol in hand, his combat instincts screaming. The girl, Ilara, was on her knees, her hands braced against the ground, a look of shock on her own face. She hadn't been attacking him. She had lost control. His eyes followed the path of the force wave she had unleashed. It had slammed into the granite slab she'd been hiding behind. The massive rock didn't have a scratch on it, but the cliff face behind it was another story. A huge section of the rock wall had been blown clean off, shattering into a million pieces and revealing what was underneath. Kale's breath caught in his throat. His pistol suddenly felt very heavy. Where the rock had been, a thick, pulsating vein of dark blue crystal was now exposed. It glowed with a soft, internal light, humming with a latent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. It was raw, uncut, and impossibly pure. Resonance crystals, the stuff of legends. A single, unrefined shard the size of his fist was worth more than his entire kit, his ship, everything he owned. And this was a vein 10 meters long. His mind, conditioned by years of survival and scavenging, instantly calculated the value. It was a number so large, it was absurd. It was a king's ransom. It was a new life. He slowly holstered his pistol. He looked at the fortune embedded in the cliffside. Then he looked at the girl on the ground, the terrified, exhausted, walking, talking key to that fortune. His expression shifted. The annoyance was gone. The weary indifference was gone. In their place was the sharp, focused, predatory glint of a hunter who had just stumbled upon the prize of a lifetime. For a long moment, Kale didn't move. He simply stared. The scavenger part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive for 10 brutal years, working at light speed. He wasn't seeing blue rock. He was seeing numbers. Big ones. He knew the black market rates for raw, unrefined resonance crystals. He knew the transport fees, the bribes for port authorities, the cut for the off-world fences who could move this kind of high-value, unregistered material. He did the math 3 times in his head, and each time the result was the same. Staggering. It was enough to buy a new ship, a clean identity, a private moon, and a system where no one knew his name. It was the end of the game. His gaze, sharp and calculating, shifted from the fortune in the wall to the girl on the ground. She was no longer an annoyance. She was no longer a failed robber. She was a variable in his profit calculation. An asset, the blast that had revealed the vein. Was it a fluke? A 1 in a million accident? Or was it something she could control? Something she could repeat? The thought sent a jolt of pure, cold avarice through him. This wasn't just a mine. It was a map, and she was the one who could read it. He walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate, no longer threatening but inquisitive. Like a technician approaching a strange, powerful new machine. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice stripped of its earlier hostility. Ilara looked up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I don't know," she stammered. "It just happens. When I'm scared. Or angry." "It happens," Kale repeated, his mind racing. He gestured with his chin towards the exposed crystals. "And does it always do that?" "I don't know. I try not to." She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make herself smaller. "They told me I was a weapon. A mistake. They wanted to contain me." "They?" Kale pressed, his voice neutral. He was gathering data. "The scientists at Atelier Dynamics," she whispered, the name of the corporation sounding like a curse. "I escaped. I ran. I have to get to Waypoint 7. There's a ship, a captain who's supposed to help me get away." There it was. The complete picture. An escaped corporate asset with a rare and valuable talent. A destination, a need for a guide. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They practically assembled themselves into a blueprint for his own enrichment. He couldn't possibly mine this entire vein himself. It would take a full crew and heavy equipment, and the moment he started, it would light up every sensor on this side of the planet. Every scrapper, scavenger, and corporate drone for 100 clicks would descend on this spot. But a single man and a girl, they could travel light. They could travel fast. And if she could point him to smaller, undiscovered deposits along the way to her precious Waypoint 7, he could build his fortune one piece at a time. It was a perfect symbiotic arrangement. She got a bodyguard and a guide. He got a living, breathing treasure map. He made his decision. He walked over to her pack, the one she had dropped in the sand. He picked it up and dusted it off, a gesture that was the complete opposite of his earlier dismissal. He held it out to her. She flinched, expecting a trick. "Get up," he said. It wasn't a request. "You're not going to make it to Waypoint 7 looking like that. You'll be dead from dehydration before the sun set tomorrow." She stared at him, bewildered by the sudden change. "What? Why are you—" "I'm a pragmatist," Kyle cut her off, his voice all business. "You need to get to Waypoint 7. I know the routes. You have a particular talent for geological surveying." He gave a pointed look at the glittering wall, a talent that could be very useful. He laid out the terms, cold and clear. "Here's the deal. I guide you. I provide water, food, and protection. You do exactly what I say, when I say it. No questions, no arguments. And on the way, if we happen to come across any more opportunities like this one, you help me investigate. In exchange, I get you to your ship in one piece. That's the offer. Take it or leave it. He wasn't offering charity. He was proposing a business transaction. He didn't mention the fortune he planned to make off her. He didn't need to. He could see the desperation in her eyes. She was alone, hunted, and out of her depth in a world designed to kill her. She looked from his unreadable face to the vast, hostile desert stretching out in every direction. This grim, calculating man had defeated her without effort, witnessed her terrifying power without panic, and was now offering her the one thing she didn't have, a chance. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took her pack from him. "Okay," she whispered. A slow, predatory smile touched Kayel's lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Good," he said, turning his back to her and shouldering his own pack. "Let's move. This claim is already getting crowded." He started walking, not looking back to see if she was following. He knew she would be. She was an asset now, and you always keep your assets close. Their new pack did not make Kayel a gentle companion. If anything, he became a more demanding taskmaster. He saw Alara not as a person, but as a high-performance engine that was running inefficiently. Every day was a relentless drill, designed to turn her raw, explosive talent into a reliable tool. His tool. "You're wasting energy," he'd bark, as she sent a massive kinetic wave to clear a small rock slide from their path, the effort leaving her pale and breathless. That was a tidal wave. All you needed was a shovel. The breaking point came in a wide, sun-baked canyon. Kale pointed to a massive boulder perched precariously on a ledge 100 meters away. It was the size of a small shuttle. "I want you to move that," he commanded. "Push it off the ledge." Alara, tired of his constant criticism, decided to show him what real power looked like. She planted her feet, took a deep breath, and unleashed the full, untamed fury of her abilities. It wasn't a push, it was an eruption. A visible wave of shimmering force exploded from her, tearing across the canyon floor. It struck the ledge with the force of a missile. The boulder wasn't just pushed off. The entire cliff face it rested on disintegrated into an avalanche of dust and stone. The ground shook, and the sound of the rockfall echoed for miles. She stood panting, a triumphant smirk on her face, expecting a rare word of praise. Kale just stared at the cloud of dust, his expression one of pure, undiluted annoyance. "Idiot," he said, his voice flat. "That was a complete waste. You just used enough energy to stop a transport hauler. And for what? To move one rock. You practically sent up a flare for every raider in the sector." He stalked over to her, jabbing a finger in her direction. "Listen to me. In a real fight, your energy is your life. It's the ammunition in your magazine. The second you run out, you're dead. Don't blow up the whole mountain when you just need to knock over a tree." He pointed to a much smaller target, a solitary pillar of rock, no taller than a man. "This time you don't use a wave. You don't explode. You use a punch, a single focused bolt of force, just enough to knock it over. No more. Conserve your energy. Be efficient." Frustration and shame burned in Alara's cheeks. She turned to the new target, determined to get it right. She closed her eyes, trying to shape the chaotic energy inside her. Not into a wide wave, but into a tight, focused spear. She gathered the power, feeling it churn in her gut, a wild horse fighting the reins. She tried to compress it, to give it direction, but her control slipped. She thrust her hands forward, but what came out wasn't a clean punch. It was a chaotic, discordant pulse of raw, kinetic energy, a blast of static that shot across the clearing. It missed the rock pillar entirely, slamming into the canyon wall behind Kale. The impact wasn't the problem. It was the frequency of the blast. For Kale, the world simply ended. The chaotic kinetic pulse hit his faulty neural implant like a physical blow. A universe of white noise and searing agony erupted in his skull. His vision dissolved into a screaming static, the twin suns becoming blinding supernovas. A wave of nausea so profound it buckled his knees. He cried out, a strangled, inhuman sound, and collapsed to the ground. His body caught in a violent seizure, his limbs twitching beyond his control. Alara's anger vanished, replaced by sheer terror. She saw him fall, saw him convulsing in the dust. She thought her blast had somehow hit him, that she had killed him. She scrambled to his side, calling his name, but he was gone, lost in a world of pain she couldn't see. In her panic, she reached out to steady him, And the moment her fingers touched his shoulder, she felt it. Through her kinetic sense, she felt the chaos inside him, a violent high-frequency shudder running through his nervous system, centered at the base of his skull. It felt like a machine shaking itself to pieces. It was the same chaotic energy she had just unleashed, but trapped inside him. Guilt, sharp and overwhelming, pierced through her fear. This was her fault. She didn't know what to do, but she knew she had to do something. Kale's words echoed in her mind. Focus, be efficient. She took a shuddering breath, pushing down her panic. She placed her palm flat, hovering it an inch above his forehead. She didn't try to stop the violent shaking inside him. She didn't know how. Instead, she tried to introduce a new rhythm. She closed her eyes and focused, not on a blast, but on the gentlest pulse she could create. A soft, steady, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. A kinetic pulse in the shape of a slow, steady heartbeat. She pushed it gently from her palm, an offering of calm into his storm. Inside the screaming chaos of his own mind, Kale felt it. A new sensation. A gentle, rhythmic pressure that wasn't fighting the static but was giving his own haywire systems a new beat to follow. The violent seizures began to subside, his trembling muscles slowly unknotting. The blinding white light at the edge of his vision receded. The agony in his skull lessened, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. He came back to himself with a deep, gasping breath, the taste of dust and blood in his mouth. He was drenched in sweat. His vision cleared, and the first thing he saw was Alara kneeling over him, her face pale with worry, her hand hovering over his head, emitting a warmth he could feel even without touching. He saw the silvery lines on the back of her hand, glowing faintly with the effort. He understood what she had done. The transactional nature of their deal, his view of her as a simple tool, a means to an end, it all fractured in that moment. The tool had just saved him from his own brokenness. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his body screaming in protest. He looked at her, and the cold, calculating mask he always wore had cracked. "You," he croaked, his throat raw. He had to clear it before he could speak. "Your control, it's getting better." It was the closest he could get to saying thank you. And for the first time, it was enough. The quiet understanding forged between them in the canyon changed the nature of their journey. A fragile trust took root. Kale found himself explaining the nuances of tracking across the crystalline sands. Alara, in turn, learned to project a low, steadying kinetic pulse whenever she sensed the telltale thrum of his implant beginning to fray, staving off his episodes before they could begin. They moved as a unit, no longer just a pragmatist and his tool, but two survivors bound by a shared secret. After 10 grueling cycles, KCL's outdated map promised them a reward. Haven. "It's a free trade outpost," he explained, a rare note of something approaching optimism in his voice. "We can get a hot meal, recharge the power cells, and trade for some clean water. A little civilization before the final push." For Alara, who had known only a lab in a desert, the idea of a town of other people living freely was a near mythical concept. As the squat, prefabricated domes of the settlement appeared on the horizon, she felt a flicker of hope. The hope died the moment they got close enough to hear it. It wasn't the sound of a bustling town. It was the joyless, rhythmic clang, clang, clang of hundreds of mining picks striking rock in perfect, miserable unison. The outpost was surrounded by makeshift watchtowers, each manned by a guard in scavenged armor. A ragged banner flew from the central command tower, its symbol a snarling metallic dog's head. The insignia of the Iron Hounds, a brutal scavenger clan known for pillaging entire settlements. Kale's face hardened, his brief optimism evaporating into cold reality. "Change of plans," he muttered, his hand instinctively moving closer to his pistol. "We get what we need and we get out. Keep your head down." His plan to resupply was already in ruins. The entire settlement had been turned into a massive, open-air slave camp. Miners with hollow eyes and gaunt faces trudged from the deep quarry to the refinery, their movements overseen by swaggering iron hounds. The air hung thick with dust, sweat, and a palpable sense of despair. Kale's dream of a payday, of a quiet score, was gone. This was a hornet's nest. They tried to skirt the edge of the main plaza, to slip into the shadows of the workshops, but their clean gear and purposeful stride marked them as outsiders. A hulking iron hound with a jagged scar across his face moved to block their path, a crude grin on his face. "Well now," the brute grunted, Look what the sand dragged in. You two lost? Just passing through, Kale said, his voice a low growl. Nobody passes through Haven anymore, the guard sneered, raising his rifle. This is Rorik's town. Now empty your... He never finished the sentence. A voice like grinding rocks boomed from behind them. What's this? The guard immediately stiffened. A massive figure strode into the plaza, parting the crowd of terrified miners like a warship through water. He was a giant of a man, made even larger by the suit of heavy, mismatched power armor he wore. It was an ugly, brutalist creation of salvaged ship plating, industrial exoframes, and military-grade servos all bolted and welded together. It wasn't sleek, but it radiated pure, indomitable strength. In his gauntlets, he held a weapon to match, a two-handed energy maul, its massive head crackling with a barely contained field of blue energy. This was Rorik the Breaker. His eyes, small and sharp like chips of obsidian, scanned them. He dismissed Alara immediately, his gaze locking onto Kale. He saw the way Kale stood, the latent military discipline in his posture. He saw a threat. You don't look like a miner, Rorik's voice rumbled, the sound vibrating in Kale's chest. You look like a soldier. What's a soldier doing in my town? Your town? Kale shot back, unable to hide the contempt in his voice. Rorik's grin was all teeth. My town, my crystals, my people. He took a heavy step forward, the ground seeming to shake. And I don't like soldiers. They give my people ideas. He looked past Kale, his voice rising to a bellow for the benefit of the watching miners. Ideas are dangerous. Hope is a disease. I am the cure. He turned his attention back to Kale. I'm going to teach you a lesson. And I'm going to let everyone watch. So they understand. Before Kale could react, Rorik moved with a speed that defied his size. The energy maul swung in a devastating arc. Kale dodged, the head of the hammer missing him by an inch, but the kinetic force behind it still slamming into him like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his ribs screaming. Alara cried out, her hands instinctively rising, ready to unleash a blast. But guards grabbed her arms, and she saw the faces of the miners all around them. A blast here would kill dozens of innocents. She was helpless. Kale drew his pistol and fired 3 quick shots. The slugs sparked harmlessly against Rorik's heavy chest plate. The giant laughed, a booming, ugly sound. A pea shooter! He lunged again. This time, Kale wasn't fast enough. The maul didn't hit him squarely, but the energy field that enveloped it did. It was like being struck by lightning. Kale's body seized up, and he was thrown backward, crashing into a pile of empty barrels. He tried to get up, his vision swimming, his muscles screaming in protest. Rorik stood over him, raising the maul high. I am the only power in Haven, he roared. He brought the hammer down. Not to kill, to break. The blow struck Kyle's side, the sound of cracking ribs audible even over the crackle of the energy field. Kale cried out, the sound a raw grunt of agony. Rorik kicked him onto his stomach and pressed a massive boot into his back. He looked out at the silent, terrified crowd. There are no heroes here, he bellowed, his voice echoing off the buildings. There is only work. And there is only me, he gestured to his men. Throw them in the cages. Let them see what happens when you bring hope into my town. As they dragged Kyle's limp, broken body away, his last conscious thought wasn't of escape or revenge. It was the bitter, ironic taste of his own greed. He had come here chasing a fortune, and instead he had found a monster. They were thrown into a crude cage fashioned from welded scrap metal, exposed to the blistering heat of the twin suns. Kale drifted in and out of a painful consciousness. His ribs ached with every breath. Alara watched him, her fear for his safety overriding her own. The man who had been her captor, then her instructor, was now her only ally, and he was broken because of a fight that started with her. That night, a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows of the alleyways. It was Brenna, the miner elder, her face etched with a grim resolve. She slipped them a canteen of water and a small energy bar through the bars of the cage. Rorik thinks he's broken our spirit, she whispered, her voice like stones grinding together. He's only made it harder. We have a few good people. We have tools. What we don't have is a soldier. Her eyes fixed on Kyle. Kale pushed himself into a sitting position, wincing as his ribs protested. His get-rich-quick scheme was dust. His only thought now was survival, and escape was impossible without chaos. "You want to fight?" he rasped. "I can give you a fight, but I need out of this cage. And I need her." He nodded at Alara. "She's the real weapon." Their goals, once worlds apart, now aligned on a single point. They had to break Rorik's hold on Haven. Brenna's people worked fast. A coordinated accident in the refinery created a diversion, drawing the bulk of the guards away from the cages. In the ensuing confusion, the lock on their cage was sliced open with a plasma cutter. They were free. Their plan was daring and relied on speed and surprise. A convoy of 2 trucks was scheduled to leave at dawn, carrying a shipment of raw crystals. Their target was the lead truck, and the kill zone was a narrow, winding canyon just outside the settlement. They got into position as the bruised purple light of the suns began to bleed over the horizon. Alara lay prone on a high ledge overlooking the canyon road, Kael beside her, acting as her spotter. Below, Brenna and a dozen miners armed with sharpened tools and captured slug throwers waited in the shadows of the rocks. "Remember the lesson," Kael said, his voice low. "Efficiency. A single hard punch. Right on the front axle. Don't waste energy on a light show." Alara nodded, her breathing steady. She closed her eyes, focusing. When the lead truck rumbled into view below, she saw it in her mind's eye not as a vehicle, but as a collection of parts. She found the axle, a single solid piece of load-bearing steel. She gathered her power, compressing it, shaping it into a spear of pure kinetic force. She thrust her hands forward. There was no sound, no visible wave. But down in the canyon, the driver of the lead truck screamed as his vehicle was violently shoved sideways, as if struck by an invisible giant. There was a sharp, piercing crack of shearing metal. The front axle snapped. The truck, its steering gone, swerved hard and crashed head-on into the canyon wall with a thunderous roar of tortured metal. The second truck, caught by surprise, slammed on its brakes, its tires screeching. "Now!" Kael roared. The miners swarmed from the shadows. The attack was a whirlwind of brutal, desperate violence. The disoriented iron hounds in the wrecked truck were dispatched before they could even climb out. Kael, fighting with a cold, precise fury, led the charge against the second truck, his pistol barking. Alara provided support from above, sending focused kinetic pulses to knock weapons from the hands of the enemy or throw them off balance. The fight was over in 90 seconds. It was a complete, unqualified victory. The miners cheered, their voices raw with triumph, holding up their captured rifles. They had taken supplies, weapons, and more importantly, they had taken back a piece of their pride. For a fleeting moment, standing amidst the smoking wreckage, they were not slaves. They were soldiers. The elation was a fragile bubble, and Rorik the Breaker was the one to pop it. When news of the ambush reached him, his response was not tactical, it was primal. He strode into the center of the plaza, his energy maul crackling, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. "Round them up!" he bellowed, his voice so loud it seemed to shake the very foundations of the buildings. "Every last one of them!" His iron hounds brutally herded the entire population of Haven into the plaza. Men, women, and children were shoved into a terrified, trembling mass. Rorik walked through the crowd like a predator inspecting a herd. He grabbed a young man who looked defiantly at him. He grabbed a weeping woman clutching a child. He grabbed an old man who could barely stand. He threw all 3 of them to their knees in the dust. "The rats in my walls have grown claws," he roared, his voice amplified by the outpost speakers. "They think they are lions because they can bite my heels. For this insult, I will take a price in blood." He pointed at the 3 kneeling hostages. "You have 1 hour," he announced, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "The saboteurs will surrender themselves in this plaza. If they do not, I will execute these 3 one by one. And then I will pick 3 more. I will keep doing it until the traitors are brought before me. Your rebellion will be paid for by the lives of your neighbors." From their new hideout in a forgotten maintenance tunnel, Kael, Alara, and the others watched the scene on a scavenged monitor. The miners who had been celebrating moments before were now pale with horror. "It's a trap," Kael said, his voice grim. "He wants us to show ourselves." "We can't let them die," Alara pleaded, her eyes fixed on the terrified face of the child on the screen. "Kael, we have to do something." He knew she was right. His cold, pragmatic survival instinct was at war with a part of himself he thought had died on Kerberos. He looked at the faces of Brenna and her people. He had led them to a victory, and now it had brought them to this. It was his responsibility. "We can't fight our way in," he said, his mind racing. "It's a kill box. We need a diversion. Something big." Their plan was rushed, born of desperation. Alara would use a massive kinetic blast to topple a nearby, unstable communication tower on the far side of the plaza, drawing the attention of Rorik and his men. In that moment of confusion, KL and a small team would rush in, grab the hostages, and pull them back into the alleyways. It was a clumsy, desperate gamble. As the tower fell with a deafening crash, the plan went into motion. The chaos was perfect. Rorik and his men instinctively turned toward the sound. "Go!" Kale yelled. He and 3 miners sprinted from the shadows, heading for the kneeling hostages. They were halfway there when the trap was sprung. Hidden snipers on the rooftops, who had never taken their eyes off the hostages, opened fire. The plaza became a maelstrom of blaster bolts. One of the miners beside Kyle went down with a crane. Kale saw a sniper draw a bead on the young male hostage. There was no time to think. He shoved the young man hard, pushing him to the ground. A searing white-hot pain exploded in his left shoulder. He was thrown backward, the force of the shot spinning him around before he collapsed into the dust. The rescue attempt fell apart. "Kale!" Alara screamed from the alley. Brenna and her team laid down a desperate covering fire. Alara, her face a mask of fury and terror, threw up a shimmering wall of kinetic energy, a translucent shield that deflected a hail of incoming shots. Under the cover of this shield, they scrambled forward, grabbed the wounded Kyle, and dragged him back into the darkness of the alley. They had failed. The hostages were still in Rorik's hands. They had lost good people. And their leader, the soldier who had given them hope, was now bleeding out in the dust. The price of their defiance paid in full. The retreat to the maintenance tunnels was a blur of pain and desperation. Kale's shoulder was a ruin of scorched flesh and splintered bone. As Brenna worked to stabilize him with a crude medical kit, they could hear Rorik's voice, amplified by the outpost speakers, echoing through the settlement. It was a roar of pure vindictive fury. The failed rescue had enraged him. "The hour has passed," his voice boomed. "The rats did not surrender. They chose to hide while their own people suffered. For this cowardice, the price has gone up. At the zenith, when the suns are at their hottest, I will not execute the 3. I will execute their elder, Brenna, in the center of the plaza for all to see. I will break the heart of this rebellion, and then I will burn the rest of it to the ground." A wave of despair washed over the small group of rebels. Brenna, who had just returned after leading another group to safety, simply nodded, her face grim but resolute. "He will not break us." Kyle, propped against a wall and gritting his teeth against the pain, looked at Alara. He saw the terror in her eyes, but underneath it, he saw a simmering, dangerous rage. His plan had failed. His body was failing. He had one last, desperate card to play. In the supply locker, he rasped, nodding to a rusted cabinet. "There should be a mining charge. The unstable kind." Brenna's eyes widened. "That's a suicide mission." "He'll be focused on you, Brenna," Kale said, his gaze unwavering. "He'll be making a speech. He won't see it coming." He looked at Alara. "And he won't see you." The plaza was a furnace. The twin suns beat down, reflecting off the crystalline sand with a blinding intensity. The miners were forced into a circle, a wall of silent, terrified witnesses. In the center, Brenna was on her knees, her head held high. Rorik stood over her, his massive energy maul humming, savoring the moment. He was making his speech, a long, rambling diatribe about power, order, and the futility of hope. From her vantage point on the roof of a burned-out hab block, Alara watched, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She could see Kyle, a ghost in the shadows of a deep alleyway across the plaza, clutching the small, cylindrical mining charge. This was it, the final desperate gamble. Rorik finished his speech. He raised the energy maul high above his head, its blue field crackling. "Let this be the end of it," he roared. As the hammer began its descent, Kale acted. He didn't have the strength to throw the charge far. Instead, he armed it and slid it across the dusty ground. The small cylinder skittered across the plaza, coming to a stop near a stack of empty fuel barrels a dozen meters to Rorik's left. Rorik, his attention locked on his victim, didn't notice. The explosion was not massive, but it was violent. The fuel barrels erupted in a ball of orange flame and thick black smoke. The concussion rocked the plaza. The crowd screamed and surged backward. Rorik, startled by the blast, instinctively turned toward the explosion, his killing blow momentarily forgotten. His back was exposed. His attention was diverted. It was the only opening she would get. On the rooftop, something inside Alara snapped. The fear, the guilt, the grief for the fallen miners, the fury at the monster below. It all coalesced into a single blinding point of pure incandescent rage. The lessons about control, about efficiency, about the scalpel, they burned away like dry grass. All that was left was the sledgehammer. The air around her warped and shimmered. The silvery lines on her arms and hands erupted with a brilliant, white-hot light. She didn't shape the energy. She didn't aim it. She gathered every last drop of power she possessed and unleashed it. It was not a silent pulse. It was not an invisible spear. It was a visible, roaring wave of pure kinetic force, a distortion in reality that shot across the plaza, tearing the very air apart. The wave struck Rorik with the sound of a thunderclap that was felt in the bone. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. His heavy, scavenged armor, designed to withstand blaster fire and shrapnel, was utterly useless against this kind of raw, fundamental force. The chest plate didn't just dent, it concave, folding inward with a horrifying shriek of protesting metal. For a fraction of a second, the giant warlord was compressed, his massive frame crushed under an impossible pressure. Then the energy had nowhere else to go. With a second, even louder boom, the armor exploded outwards. It didn't just break, it detonated. The chest plate, the shoulder pauldrons, the armored gauntlets, they were all ripped apart, blasted into a cloud of jagged, red-hot shrapnel that scythed through the air. Rorik's body, unprotected and broken, was thrown backward like a rag doll. He slammed into the reinforced wall of the command center with a sickening, wet crunch, leaving a crimson smear before slumping to the ground in a lifeless, mangled heap. A profound silence fell over the plaza, broken only by the crackle of the burning barrels. The smoke began to clear. The Iron Hounds, who had turned to face the initial explosion, now turned back to see the spot where their leader had stood, and saw nothing. Only the mangled, smoking scraps of his armor scattered across the ground. Their invincible leader, their god of strength and brutality, had been erased. Annihilated, blown apart by a power they couldn't comprehend. The spell of fear was broken. The foundation of their power was gone. One of the brutes, his face a mask of pure terror, dropped his rifle and ran. Then another. Within seconds, the chain reaction of panic consumed them. They were no longer a conquering army. They were a terrified mob, scrambling, shoving and trampling each other in a desperate stampede to get to their vehicles, to escape this place of ghosts and impossible power. On the rooftop, Alara fell to her knees, her body trembling, completely drained. She watched them flee. Below, the miners of Haven slowly, hesitantly, began to rise to their feet, staring at the impossible aftermath, their faces filled with a dawning, fragile, and beautiful awe. In the days that followed, a fragile peace settled over Haven. The roar of Rorik's enforcers was replaced by the determined sounds of rebuilding. The Iron Hounds were gone, scattered to the winds, their story a terrifying legend that would be whispered across the Badlands for years to come. Kale recovered slowly. The blaster wound in his shoulder was a deep, searing ache, a constant reminder of his own recklessness. He would sit on the porch of the community hall, watching the miners work together to repair the damage, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't felt since before Kerberos, before the cynicism had taken root, a quiet, unassuming sense of pride. He had come to this place looking for a selfish score, a way to cash in and disappear. He had failed completely. And yet, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a failure. Alara would often sit with him, the two of them watching the twin suns set in comfortable silence. The raw, untamed power within her felt different now. It was still there, a coiled serpent of force, but the fear was gone. She had faced the worst of it and bent it to her will. The silvery, web-like patterns on her hands and forearms were a permanent testament to that day. Scars that she now wore not with shame, but with a quiet strength. One evening, Kale broke the silence. "We could still go," he said, nodding toward the northern path that snaked through the desert. "Waypoint 7 is still out there." We could take one of the scrappers' vehicles. Be gone before anyone even knew where to look. Ilara followed his gaze. For so long, that single destination had been her only hope, a beacon in the darkness. The idea of escape, of vanishing, was tempting. But she thought of the faces of the miners. She thought of Brena, who now led Haven with a new fire in her eyes. She thought of Kale, who had been ready to die for them. Running felt hollow now. It felt like a betrayal. The corporation that made me is still out there, Kale said, his voice grim, as if reading her thoughts. I know, Ilara replied, her voice steady and clear, devoid of the fear it once held. They'll never stop hunting me. Kale turned from the distant path and looked at her, at the determined set of her jaw and the strength in her eyes. He saw not a frightened girl or a valuable asset, but a partner, a soldier. A slow smile touched his lips. Then we stop running, he said. Let them come. A new energy sparked in Ilara's eyes, a look of fierce agreement. They had been prey for too long. It was time to become the trap. They stood up and turned their backs on the northern path for good. They looked out not at an escape route, but at their new home. It wasn't just a collection of broken buildings anymore. It was a fortress in the making. It was a line drawn in the endless sand. It was the place where they would make their stand. The war for Haven was over, but the war against Ethylear dynamics had just begun.